sabbatical on a 3-week trip to Scotland and Ireland. And I've known pastors who go on sabbatical and they come back refreshed and they come back excited like they had a nice long vacation, but still mostly the same and kind of hopping right back into the work. But this pastor, she was different when she came back. I could tell that it kind of brought her this soul rest that I hadn't often seen from sabbaticals. And she started talking about Celtic Christianity a lot, and her ancestors were Scottish, so she felt like this was her right to talk about it anyway because that's where she came from. And she talked about these connections and this new way that she was starting to experience her Christianity. And I might also add that at the time of her sabbatical, she was like 67 years old. She'd been a Christian for like a solid 60 years of her life up to this point. So she was just now discovering these new ways to engage with God. And I finally sat down with her one day and said, it seems like this sabbatical experience of yours really shifted something in you. You really seem to have come back different. And she said, Andrea, I wish I had done this 50 years ago, because I feel like these Celtic practices and these understandings of Christianity would have such a difference in how I practice my ministry and in how I live my life with God. And in fact, and then she turned around from her desk, pulls something off of her bookshelf and hands me this book. And in fact, I think you starting out in ministry would really benefit from this. So here, take this book, read these practices. So by the way, we're going to make this book available. If anybody would like one, we'd be happy to order one for you with all the different practices that are in it. But that word Celtic, I haven't always been familiar with it. It really just describes the people and the culture and the language of kind of the area of the British Isles, which for a very brief Christian history lesson, most of the church came under the umbrella of Rome, right? Rome was the center of the religion. Well, with the Roman Empire, the British Isles were really at the farthest reaches of the Roman Empire. They were like at the farthest parts of the known world. So whereas Christianity that developed closer to Rome really had the oversight of Rome, the Christianity that developed at the farthest reaches of the known world kind of grew with its own freedom. They got to do things a little bit differently. They weren't quite under the thumb, quite in the eyesight of what was happening in the center of religion. So the Christianity that developed there, what we call Celtic Christianity, really takes on a different flavor than a lot of the other historic Christian stuff that we talk about. For example, in Celtic Christianity, women could hold positions of leadership. Priests were sometimes allowed and even encouraged to marry. And they just looked at the world differently, from the natural landscape of things to the way we think about our spirit and our bodies. And in fact, that's what this spiritual practice is of soul friendship. It's a combination of body and spirit, which is not really something that the typical traditional Christianity in Rome developed. They kind of thought everything that was of the body was sinful, and the things that we should strive for are the things of the spirit. So there's a reason why we don't allow, church leadership to marry, because romance and marriage and family, those are the things of the body, and we want to focus on the things of the spirit. But Celtic Christianity didn't see that dualism. They thought these two things can be interconnected, which is where we get the concept of soul friendship. It combines both body and spirit in a way we don't often talk about. And we're going to talk about it today. And I really wanted John and David to speak to us because I maybe have never seen a better example of soul friendship in my life than this relationship between John Bowley and David Privet. They disagree politically on things a lot. They disagree theologically on some things a lot. They're different ages. They come from different backgrounds. And yet, there's this really interesting connection that goes beyond just their taste in music, which seems to be where y'all agree on a lot of things. And so thank you for sharing with us, both of you guys. I really appreciated that. But that's kind of this idea of soul friendship. It crosses all sorts of barriers. We're going to get to that in a second, but I actually did this on purpose. I planned to talk about soul friendship on Father's Day because I want to take a moment to talk about fathers. In our society, Y'all know fatherhood is a difficult topic. Fathers get a lot of credit and they get a lot of blame for a lot of things. There are studies that show commonalities in the development and behavior of young girls when they have an absent father. There are studies that show similarities among sons who have really strict or stern fathers, and also sons who have absent ones. And what these studies say, without saying, what the inverse of what these studies show, is that good fathers, healthy, present, loving fathers, make a world of difference in the lives of their children and in the entire world. Being a good father has a domino effect. It means you raise up these children who then go live into this world in confident and competent ways. And these children help make the world a better place because they had a healthy, good father. Being a good father really can change the world. We know all damages that fathers can do. Fathers can create a world of hurt. Fathers can create a world of trauma. Or fathers can change the world for the better. And I think good fathers absolutely should be celebrated. And I realize I'm using that word good a lot as I talk about fathers, and I want to define what I mean by that. This is just my definition. You might add to it, you might adjust it slightly, but to me, a good father is someone who is healthy and present and loving. Healthy and present and loving. Healthy meaning both emotionally and spiritually healthy. And if they aren't, because let's be honest, none of us are born that way. If they aren't, they're able to get help and do the work and start the journey of becoming emotionally and spiritually healthy. It's not something you have to reach the destination. It's just something that you're working on. So I think good fathers are emotionally and spiritually healthy, or they're working on it. I also think good fathers are present and loving with their families. They're the kind of men who can say, I love you and I'm proud of you, who can give hugs or high fives. They're encouragers, not diminishers of other people. And they know it's more important to be available to their families than it is to be available to their bosses. And that doesn't always work out because we all have to keep our salaries and we all have to keep our jobs. But if they're not always as present as they want to be, they're working on it. They're aware of it, and they're trying. I think good fathers are healthy or working on it, present or working on it, and loving or working on it, because we all sometimes have trauma in that regard too. This is my definition of a good father. And I think in order for fathers and men to be this way, to be this good version of themselves, y'all, I think they need friends. I think having close friends, even just one, would help all men live into their good, truest selves. And the truth is, I think it would help all of us live into our good, truest selves. But for some reason, it seems to be a little bit more difficult for men than it does for women. Our society often puts stuff on fathers. I made sure Aaron read this part before I said it out loud because I wanted to be accurate. I was like, I'm not a man or a father, and I just need you to check this for me. I said, society often puts stuff on fathers, and maybe not just fathers, maybe men in general, that seem really burdensome. You have to be the strong one. You have to be the tough one. You have to carry your family's burdens. You can never show weakness or fear or indecision. You need to act like nothing bothers you and you've got it all together. And maybe you can be honest with your spouse, but definitely not other men. Definitely not other male friends. And certainly there are exceptions to this, but that seems to be what society expects of men and fathers. And I want to tell you that I think that's a deep and prominent lie of our culture. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this spiritual practice on this day, the practice of soul friendship on Father's Day. This practice of soul friendship, it isn't just for men, it isn't just for fathers, but I'm connecting the two today because being a good father is hard. Being a good man is hard, I think. And having a good friend, a soul friend, could make that burden a little bit easier to bear. So let's define this concept of soul friend. The Gaelic term for this is anam cara. Anam from the word for soul and cara from the word for friend, anam cara. And we saw it in the verses that Pat read for us today. David and Jonathan have this kind of infamous friendship in the scripture, and they just like meet, and it says, and they met each other, and all of a sudden the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. They just became instant, fast, deep friends. Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And their relationship seemed to surpass even those of brothers. They rooted for each other. They fought for each other. They were honest with each other. David cried in front of Jonathan. Jonathan cried when he found out his dad was trying to kill David. There's a whole family drama of this story. Jonathan helped save David's life. There are all sorts of things about this. It was such a deep, intense friendship. They had this deep and abiding love for one another in the most truest sense of the word. And so much so that I know some scholars that have looked at that friendship and wondered if they were romantically involved, because it's just not common for us to see two men who talk about each other like this. Based on my own research, I don't think they were romantically involved. But I do think that the love that they had for each other was kind of this truest, deepest sense of friendship, this soul friendship that the Celts talk about. John O'Donohue put it like this: the soul is a divine light that flows into you and into the other, creating a belonging that awakens and fastens a deep and special companionship. A belonging that awakens and fastens a deep and special companionship. A soul friend is the kind of friendship that cuts across all convention and all morality and all category, age, gender, class, situation in life. There are no restrictions on who an anam cara can be, as long as it's reciprocal and in an equal power dynamic. So someone is not a soul friend if you have to be what they want you to be in order to maintain that friendship. Activity-based friends like soccer parents or work associates or neighbors are also not soul friends if that's the extent of the friendship. Granted, all these friends, these healthy friendships, they're all good things. They're all good for us. And certainly we all have people that we call for certain things, like I might call another pastor if I'm having some pastor issues. But there's something uniquely special about a soul friend, about an anam cara. In the early Celtic church, it was a person who acted as a teacher or a spiritual companion or even a spiritual guide. It was someone who you felt comfortable to reveal the hidden intimacies of your life. John O'Donohue says you could share your innermost self, your mind and your heart. And these days, I think there are many types of people who we bare our innermost selves to. A priest or a pastor, maybe a therapist or even a spiritual director. These are good and helpful people, but they're not exactly reciprocal relationships. So I don't think they qualify as soul friends. And there are some sects of our religion, I think, that would say, you don't really need a friend. God is all you need. In fact, if it came between being a good friend or moving to a cabin in the woods and being a hermit, you could probably follow God better if you moved to a cabin in the woods and be a hermit. But I think that's the dualism of the body and the spirit. I think that's us pretending that anything of the body is bad. Like the writings from Wesley Hill that we put in your worship guide today, God invented friendship. God created this relationship, and I think that our faith and our lives will be better if we have this in it. I want to tell you a story. Well, first let me say this. One writing that I read says that with the soul friendship, and I heard it reflected in what David and John said, so that's why I want to make sure I say this. With a soul friendship, the love you feel for each other allows for understanding of the other. When you feel understood, you feel free to be yourself and to share the deepest parts of yourself. Your friend can serve as a mirror reflecting back to you yourself so that you can see yourself more clearly and so that you might grow emotionally and spiritually. And I heard y'all both say that in your discussions and in your questions and in the ways that you would talk to each other about things, it helped you both grow emotionally and spiritually and answer questions about yourself. These friendships are rare and incredible gifts. And I want to pause for a second, because if you don't have one in your life, I don't want you to be sitting here going, I don't have one of these, and now I'm just depressed. Happy Father's Day, everybody. Right? That's not really the point, because I think most people don't. I think these are rare and incredible gifts, these types of friendships. But what I wonder is, would we be willing to attempt the spiritual practice of having one of these? Are we willing to work to develop a friendship like this? Do we feel like it's worthwhile and beneficial to have a soul friendship in our lives? In this book called My Grandfather's Blessings, the author's name is Rachel Riemann, and she tells a story of a man who used to spend time with his son before the man got cancer. And he said, we would hike up a mountain. It would be a difficult climb, but we'd climb side by side, both focused on reaching the top. And then we would come down a different way, one of us behind the other to make sure we're okay, and then we'd get in our car and we would drive home. He said, we did this many times. And in thinking back, I have a clear memory of many of these climbs, but no memory of anything my son said to me or anything I said to my son. The author, Rachel Riemann, explains that in child psychology, what this man is describing is called parallel play. And it's normal for kids between the ages of 2 and 3, because at that age, children use the same sandbox and they use the same toys, but they're really playing alone. They're playing next to each other and not with each other. So they don't have to relate to one another, they're just relating to the common activity. The man in her story makes a great contrast between this and the way that he and his son relate once he got cancer and could no longer climb mountains. And this is what he said. He said, I can't do much now, so we sit and talk. I ask him about his life and how he feels about it. For the first time, I know what's important to him. I know what sort of man he is. I know what keeps him going. And I talk to him too. I now know that I'm important to him, that he wants to spend time with me, and not just because we do physical things together. Sometimes we just sit together, being alive. The mountain got between us before, and I had not known that. Many people live their lives this way. Many of us live our lives this way, sharing lives or works or homes or even families with people, but we never really connect at a deeper level. And I really think that's a shame. And I think we can't always control it, just like I can't wish for a friend to suddenly appear and look, there she is, or he. But a soul friendship is a gift, and one that I really think God would delight to bless us with. I think this is something God wants for us, sees the benefit in, not just for us individually, but for the community of Christians, the one who will be known by our loves and how we walk side by side with one another. So for all of us who don't have a soul friend, I think especially men and fathers, but everyone else too, for all of us who don't have one, I'm going to use the term that my husband gave me last night. He says we should start a quest. We should start a quest to find a soul friend. This includes praying and asking God to bring someone into our lives. This includes looking, being aware, maybe being open to friendships that we already have, but that could potentially go deeper. And I think it also includes a little bit of risk. A soul friendship like this involves vulnerability. I think that's a word that David said when he was talking. It involves the willingness to put ourselves out there a little bit more, to be a little bit more honest about things that are going on with us in order to find the soul friend who will reciprocate those things. But when I think about the biblical relationship between David and Jonathan, and when I think about, I was going to say the non-biblical relationship between David and John Bowley, which maybe sounds a little bit worse. When I think about David and Jonathan, when I think about our own David and John Bowley, I think the gift of having a soul friendship is worth the risk that it may take to develop one. I think it's worth the risk to develop, to seek out, to hope for this kind of friendship. And I think God wants that for all of us. May it be so.